We're going to start our trip through Shropshire's geological past in the Anthropocene. So I want to define what we mean by Anthropocene. Now, Earth's history is divided into several periods and epochs, and the Anthropocene is proposed as the most recent epoch that we're currently living in. So what do we mean by Anthropocene? Well, it's the point at which humans become one of the main driving factors in the geological activity of the Earth. Now, this is still a rather unofficial designation. The Anthropocene was first proposed in 2008, and although it's still being debated, there has been no clear benchmark given yet. It is basically between where you start the Anthropocene and what point do humans having a significant impact on the landscape. Some people want to define the Anthropocene as starting from the agricultural revolution, really at the end of the Neolithic, about 12,000 years ago. Others want to clarify it as a more modern phenomena from the beginning of the atomic age. But either way, what we've got is a period in which humans are starting to be a major driving factor within the landscape. And what I want to do in this video is go through some of the impacts on the landscape that humans have had within the county of Shropshire. Okay, so behind me is the town of Telford, and with about 150,000 people living in it, it is the largest town in the county of Shropshire. That's about a third of the population of the whole county living in it. And in 2018, Telford is 50 years old, and as far as towns go, actually 50 years is quite young. And Telford itself was part of the new town development within the UK that came into existence post World War II. Includes other new towns like Milton Keynes, Runcorn, Stevenage. And the idea behind these new towns was that they were planned community projects, and that they were going to develop the area, provide new housing for the people that had been bombed out, that lost their housing in the Second World War. Being planned communities, they would include service links such as motorways, rail networks. They also included a lot of open areas. So a lot of these were sometimes referred to as garden towns or garden cities. And as you can tell from behind me, there's a lot of trees there. It's a lot of open space in the green space. Like a lot of the other new town developments within the UK, Telford incorporated the existing settlements. Now, places like Wellington, which is the part of Telford you can see behind me there, existed well back into at least the 13th century, and probably earlier. Telford included four main settlements: Wellington, Oakengate, Dawley and Madeley, along with a few other outlying areas like Colebrook Down in the Ironbridge Gorge. So Ironbridge is often credited as a place where the modern world began and the Industrial Revolution started, and that was largely thanks to a guy called Abraham Darby, who developed his blast furnaces to be run on coke rather than charcoal, so he was able to generate a much better iron product with his pig iron. And this formed a key part of the Industrial Revolution, and one of the reasons why it took place in Ironbridge was because in Madeley, which is just to the north of the gorge, there was plenty of ironstone, so you could extract the iron ore from that. To the south, in Broseley, and also to the north in Dawley, there was plenty of coal in the rock formation, so he was able to generate his coke to fire his furnaces. And there was the River Severn cutting the gorge into existence, which provided a easy transport link down to the port of Bristol. And this is why Abraham Darby established his furnaces there, and his grandson, also called Abraham Darby, was the man that commissioned the world famous Iron Bridge that the gorge now takes its name from. Ironbridge wasn't the only location where major industrial activity was taking place in the county. Next, we're travelling to Snell Beach on the Stiper Stones to have a quick look at the mining activity that was taking place there. It may seem hard to believe now, considering how rural modern day Shropshire is, that at one point it was one of the most industrialised parts of the world. Now, a lot of people are familiar with the Ironbridge Gorge as the World Heritage Centre, and the steelworks and ironworks that was down there, started off by Abraham Darby. But there was much more industrial activity happening throughout the county than just at Ironbridge. And here at Snell Beach, they have been mining lead since the Roman period. And this lead production really hit its peak during the 19th century, when they were mining around about 3,000 tonnes of lead ore a year. Now, the lead ore that they were pulling out of the ground was this stuff, galena, and it was from this that they were to then smelt the lead out and ready to transport it for things like building works and stuff like that. And this lead production carried on right the way through up until 1895, when they ceased smelting lead here. Now, one of the other products that they were mining for was this stuff. It's called barite. Now, barite has a number of purposes, but two key ones were for the refining and whitening of sugar, which, when you consider the sugar plantations that were in the Caribbean and the links to the British Empire during the 19th century, it's not that surprising that they were mining for this stuff. But the other thing that they were using it for was for a white pigment within ceramics. And here in Shropshire, we're not that far away from Staffordshire and the major pottery works that were in the Stoke-on-Trent area, so it's not surprising that they mined this stuff out and shipped it over to Staffordshire. Now, the barite production finished here around about 1955, and from that point on the mine works were closed in the Snell Beach area. From the beginning of the 20th century, they started to do some clearing work to help stabilise the spoil heaps, and it's one of the biggest impacts upon the landscape is the remains of the spoil heaps. I'm sat on one right now. There's another one over there, just the edge of the camera, and this is one of the biggest impacts on the landscape that is still happening now. Quarrying and mining still takes place within Shropshire in several locations, and it's that industrial activity which is leaving long-term scars on the landscape, and it's just evidence of human activity within the Anthropocene.
One of the factors that led to the Industrial Revolution was the increase in population brought on by the more intensive farming. At the Weald Moors, we can see an example of a wetland area that had been drained for agricultural use.
Across the two counties, there are dozens and dozens of sites that are very, very similar to this, or at least were similar before humans drained them. Collectively, they're known locally as the Mosses and Moors, and they're areas of fen and wetland, peat and bog, dotted across in particular the north part of the county. Starting in the early 1800s, much of the Weald Moors was drained for agricultural use. It went from being a boggy fen to something very similar to what we've got right now. Pastoral land covered with grass and surrounded by small drainage ditches. And as the ladies are providing over there, examples of the livestock that's currently grown on the landscape. One of the reasons why the land has become so productive is because of the peat that's underneath us. Produces quite a dark and organic rich soil, which is very, very good for agricultural use. And it's not surprising that people wanted to drain the land. It gives you an idea of the impact that humans have or have had within the county. Really within the past couple hundred years. I mean, the drainage systems only really started to take shape during the early 1800s. There were sporadic attempts to drain small patches before then, but it didn't really take off until the agricultural revolutions in the early 1800s, late 1700s.
Agricultural activity being the main driving factor in the shaping of the Shropshire landscape throughout much of human history. Moving on to the Anglo-Saxon period, we're taking a look at the longest ancient monuments within Shropshire, Dyck.
I'm here at Offa's Dyck, the longest ancient monument in Shropshire, and as you can see, it's a fantastically impressive earthworks with some wonderful sheep behind me. Brilliant. It's a wonderful ancient earthwork structure, and it's often credited to Offa, who was king of the Anglo-Saxon kingdom of Mercia in the second half of the 8th century. Now, there is some debate amongst historians as to whether Offa actually was the one that's had the dyke constructed. Different archaeological sites have produced different dates, some suggesting the dyke went back another couple of centuries. So there's a good possibility that when the dyke was constructed, it was actually an amalgamation of several border walls that had already been constructed between the Anglo-Saxons and Wales. Now, right now I'm in the boundary ditch itself. The wall is that side of me. England is, well, actually I'm all in England, but England is that side and Wales is that side of the boundary. Now, there's a lot of hypotheses as to why the wall was actually constructed. For some, think it's an actual physical defensive wall. For others, they think it's more of a border control. And for some, it's more of a think it might have been a status symbol from the kings of Mercia, saying, look how powerful we are and look what we can construct. Now, I'm not going to cast a judgment on any of these, and there's a possibility that all of these ideas might actually be true all at the same time. So the dyke in its current condition is 2 to 3 metres high, plus there's the boundary ditch, which I'm currently standing in right now, and the dyke as itself stretches from the north of Wales to the south and is about 240 kilometres in length all in all. Now, obviously erosion has taken its toll, and it would have most likely looked much more impressive back when it was first constructed. We know that there was the ditch has been infilled from the topsoil that's been slowly flooded in, so the ditch would also have been a lot deeper. So you can imagine the difference between the ditch that I'm standing now to the height of the dyke would probably been about 5 metres, somewhere in that range. It's just a fantastic example of the impact that humans have had, even during a time where we tend to think of civilization within Western Europe certainly as having had a dramatic reversal after the collapse of the Roman Empire and before sort of the High Middle Ages and the Renaissance, what used to be called the Dark Ages. And this just shows you that humans, even during this time, were having quite a substantial impact upon their landscape.
Agriculture being the main economic activity prior to the Industrial Revolution, the landscape was dotted with small towns and farmland right the way back to the Roman era. Moving on to Wroxeter, we can see what remains of the Roman city that was in Shropshire.
Roman Wroxeter was once the 4th largest Roman settlement in Britain. At the moment, the largest freestanding piece of Roman masonry still left standing is this one, the wall of the Basilica. And it's the interior wall between the Basilica and the Roman bathhouse. And the Basilica was used as basically an indoor gymnasium, as Britain's weather was not particularly fantastic. And there was actually at one point a swimming pool, an outdoor swimming pool for the city. Unsurprisingly, it was filled in after not a long period of time. What's left above ground is the remains of the hypocaust for the bathhouse. You've got the rooms for the frigidarium, the tepidarium and the calidarium, as well as I said, the interior wall for the basilica. There's also part of the Roman market, the agora, is also exposed, so you can have a look around that. Now, the Vericonium was once home to the 20th Legion, and that was before they moved to their main base at Chester. Now, one of the things they've also done at this site is they have built a replica Roman townhouse. That's quite an interesting thing to wander around and see what a Roman townhouse would look like during the 1st to 2nd century AD.
Prior to the Roman occupation, Shropshire was dominated by Iron Age tribes often referred to as Celts. The tribe that dominated the area within Shropshire was called the Cornavai. Now we're travelling on to Osra Street to see what the people of the Iron Age had left behind in the landscape.
The human impact upon the Shropshire landscape has been a long one, and we end up now find ourselves in the Iron Age. We've gone back some 3,000 years so far within Shropshire's history, and a place like here at Oswestry Hill Fort, you can see the dramatic example of what humans have been doing to the landscape within the county. Now, this hill was a natural hill, a piece of Carboniferous sandstone conglomerate. It was then reworked and worked from somewhere about the 9th century BC up until the Roman period, the 1st century AD, and it's just a dramatic example of the impact that humans have had on the landscape within Shropshire. Oswestry Hill Fort is just one of the many examples. You can have a look at the map, so you can get a good idea of how many hill forts there are across the whole county, most of them ranging from the first millennium BC, starting off somewhere between the 8th and 9th century, usually on the constructions, and being used right the way through the Roman, into the Roman period.
From the Iron Age we're moving on to the beginning of the Bronze Age. Our final stop is Mitchellfold Stone Circle near the Welsh border.
Now, this stone circle is Bronze Age, and it's about 3,500 years old. Now, compared to some of the other stone circles in Britain, things like Stonehenge, places like Avebury, places like that, yes, this stone circle is not that impressive, but it marks one of the oldest monuments within the county, one of the most oldest human structures anywhere within Shropshire. It marks a time when humans had gone from hunter-gathering and had become well established in the landscape. During the Bronze Age, they'd settled into farms, they'd cleared a lot of the forests away, and this really kind of marks the beginning of human impacts in a serious way upon the landscape within Shropshire. Prior to this, humans were hunter-gatherers or small-scale farmers within the British Isles, and it's monuments like this that show the point where humans no longer were living that kind of lifestyle, and they've moved into settled farms. It's 3,500 years old. Now, as old as the stone circle is, it pales in comparison to the age of the hill that it stands upon. And the Mitchellfold Stone Circle is 3,500 years old, but it stands upon a hill that is from the middle of the Ordovician period and is about 464 million years old. It's an old lava flow, and coincidentally, with this area marking the boundary between Shropshire and Wales, it used to once mark the boundary between two tectonic plates, and that was the source of the volcanic activity within this area of Shropshire.